All those preseason publications are on the newsstands or whatever website is your favorite. There are plenty. You don't need to go too far down the top 25 list to hit the Scarlet and Gray. Welcome into the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. And we definitely appreciate Pat Murphy stopping by from Bucknuts 247 Sports to talk Ohio State football. Pat, how's your summer been?
It's been good. It's been busy, both work and doing some traveling. So I've been able to mix the two nicely, which has been good. But yeah, I mean, I feel like we just summer just slowly transitions into fall here. As we're about a month out from when Ohio State will kind of get things rolling with Big Ten Media Days and preseason camp, and then there it is.
The transfer portal has been what it's been to the news cycle. And then on top of that, I just think the advent and then proliferation of social media has just created a news cycle unto its own that has maybe made news out of what was non-news 15 or 20 years ago.
Absolutely. I mean, if you think about kind of the down periods of the sport from a coverage standpoint and from a fans reading a lot of things standpoint, you got done with the regular season. You think back to even before the college football playoff, bowl games didn't start for a couple weeks. You had, the build up to obviously the BCS national championship. You go back further, that was the end of the season. And now you've got that period in there, obviously with the transfer portal, with the early signing period. Then you jump forward to spring ball. That's always a fun time. And then spring ball ends, and usually that was it for a while. There's some recruiting stuff in there until the season starts or preseason starts. But now, transfer portal immediately after spring football. Lots to talk about then. And obviously you go into the summer and it's recruiting and whatnot is the heavy focus. So, yeah, it's a year-round business, this college football sport. It reminds me of what the NFL has kind of become with the – you've got schedule releases and the draft and OTAs and all these things. There's constantly stuff to talk about, which is good for people like me who talk about it for a living.
I think the NFL has been much more strategic in its planning of the calendar and staying in the news cycle all the time. College football has just been this wild, wild west of whatever that's become everything. And just here in the last few days, of course, the college football playoff schedule was announced for next year. And to your point about December, where there was this decompression after conference championship games leading into bowl season that generally were close to Christmas. Now, the very next Saturday after the conference championship games, there will be bowl games. Army Navy is no longer just set apart, set aside to its own Saturday. No, it's going to be completely surrounded by bowl games. And then we're off into the college football playoff well before Christmas.
Right. I mean, it's completely changing your December, so to speak, if you are a college football fan, player, coach, media member, anything like that. The first game, Friday, December 20th, those are the series of the first rounds with the games on home sites, which to me still seems weird that you are rewarding the teams that finish lower with home games instead of the teams that finish in the top four. But I guess the trade-off is you get the bye and some extra time to rest and prepare and whatnot. But I think some schools would take that home game revenue for a big game. But you go straight from that, and then end of December, beginning of January, you're on to the quarterfinals where the semifinals have been. The semifinals are now right around when the national championship has been, and then national championships the end of the month. I was talking to a friend of mine, one of my friend's fiancés, who is not a big sports fan, and they have a wedding coming up. She was asking kind of my schedule, and I was like, well, if Ohio State is as good as people think they're going to be, they could be playing until the end of January, and she did not like that answer.
Yeah, it looks like a Super Bowl date now for the national championship game. And speaking of those seedings within the college football playoff, to be the number 2 team in either the Big Ten or the SEC may not be a bad position to be that number 5 seed and have a Liberty or Boise State or Memphis or somebody like that, not to discredit them, but coming to town as opposed to somebody else in that first game. So,
yeah. And look, to get a game like another game at home obviously is big. If you are in the Big Ten, it's probably going to be, well, I guess the Big Ten's expansion has changed that a little bit. More than likely, you're probably going to get a cold weather game, which I know has caused some consternation with athletic directors in terms of getting stadiums ready for December games. I'm not sure how much different that is than late November games. But I guess in some part, you think of like a Madison, Wisconsin, maybe that extra week or two does make a bit of a difference in terms of the things you have to do with your stadium. I know Penn State's planning on doing some renovations to help be ready for that. I think if you're Ohio State and you talk to people at Ohio State, we've been out at these recruiting camps, and obviously with these dates coming out, that's been kind of a topic of conversation, and they expect to be one of the teams getting a bye in the first 12-team college football playoff. And I think based on the rankings preseason and expectations, that would be the anticipation. So it will be interesting for these other teams. Like Penn State, for instance, I think is a team that's going to benefit tremendously from the expansion of the playoff. I think they would have been in it more often than not if this had been a 12-team playoff from the beginning. And look, I think more Big Ten teams that are in it, the better it looks for the conference. Obviously, more revenue for the conference, which continues to be a big topic of conversation. But yes, I think the Buckeyes will be disappointed if they are playing on December 20th, December 21st. Now, that's assuming health and everything. If you do have some injuries and you're still able to get into the playoff with as talented as this team is, you'll take that and you'll try and make a run. But this team has the expectations to be one of the top teams in the country at the end of the regular season and going into the playoff as one of those top 4 teams that gets a bye.
The college football playoff tally for the past 10 years, had there been a 12-team playoff in the Big Ten, 4 Big Ten teams would have been Ohio State 10, of course, 10 out of 10. Penn State actually 6 and Michigan 5. Penn State would have made it 6 times. They made it 0. So that's how much they would have benefited from the 12-team playoff. You speak of talent, Pat, and just in the last couple of days, Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer are on record of just jaw-dropping statements and observations and evaluations of the talent at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. So there's always an expectation for this team. It never stops. Every year, national championship seems to be the talk and seems to be the expectation. However, there does seem to be bigger emphasis and maybe a bigger target. Certainly opposing fan bases are taking advantage of the ammunition.
Absolutely. It was interesting. We spoke with Ryan Day recently, and he got asked about kind of the increased expectations for this team this year. And he said, he thinks the expectations are the same every year. You've got to beat Michigan and win every other game and try and win a national championship, which is what Ohio State's goal is this year. Now, the expectations are ramped up even from an Ohio State perspective, just because you did have nearly an entire junior class elect to return for their senior season. But these guys have to perform too, right? I mean, if you are a surefire guy like a Marvin Harrison Jr., as much as you want to beat Michigan and win a national championship and as much NIL money as there is out there, you're going to the NFL like Marvin Harrison Jr. did. So for a guy like Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Denzel Burke, Travion Henderson, any of these juniors that elected to return, it may be largely about being, ending your college career on the right note, but that's as much individual as it is as a team, right? A lot of these guys were really highly ranked and have had good careers, but maybe not the careers they expected in terms of their production, in terms of where they would have fallen in the NFL draft. So while we look at the talent returning and say, wow, this roster is one of the most talented in the country, maybe one of the most talented ever, like Urban Meyer said, these guys have to go out and live up to that potential. And staying in college football shows that they haven't quite done that to the level they expected yet. I believe that there is a lot of reason for optimism with all these guys coming back. I think you started to see, the best of Denzel Burke last year. Jack Sawyer at the end of the season. You look at his stats the last 3 or 4 games. That's the 5-star defensive end people expected in Columbus. Travion Henderson, when he's healthy, we know what he can do. He's just got to stay healthy. And obviously you bring in a Quinshon Judkins to kind of help alleviate some of the workload. So, guys like that, it's an opportunity to help themselves as much as it is the team and kind of boost their stock for the next level. But then I think you look at, I mentioned Quinshon Judkins, the transfer class that Ohio State had. And maybe that's where you start to see that roster be elevated a little bit more. You added Caleb Downs to one of the top pass defenses in the country last season. You add Quinshon Judkins to complement TreVeyon Henderson. It would have been probably TreVeyon Henderson and Dallin Hayden. Okay, Quinshon Judkins is a 2,000-yard rusher. That's a bit of an upgrade there. And I think Dallin Hayden's a really good running back and should have a good career at Colorado. You've upgraded that position. You bring in Seth McLaughlin from Alabama, and while he did have some snapping issues last season, he's an upgrade over Carson Hinsman at center, at least in the Buckeyes' eyes, and appears to be taking that job. So these transfer players, now some of them, a Julian Sayin, for instance, may not have an immediate impact, but, another opportunity there. But Will Kazmarek, the tight end, I think, too, gives you something a little bit different than what's already in that room. So that's probably where they were able to add on the edges some big pieces that may make a difference. And, that's where the roster may have been elevated and kind of taken those expectations beyond what they would have been if you just had a really talented but not yet proven senior class back.
I don't pretend to be an expert on Georgia's roster, but I'm familiar and watch 5 or 6 games a year. We did talk some Georgia football this week, and so those videos are posted, folks, on the SEC channel. I will say this. I get the impression, and I think I'm accurate on this statement, that the Georgia roster may still be the best in college football, probably as 1 through 100. With just waves and waves of defensive linemen, offensive linemen, the depth. But 1 through 20, let's say, in that range, I don't know that anyone is beating Ohio State's top end talent.
Yeah, I think, look, there's 2 ways to kind of look at it. With Georgia, you've got some proven commodities at key positions, right? Especially quarterback, with arguably the guy who will be the top pick in the NFL draft when he comes out in Carson Beck. You've got also the experience of a national championship, 2-time national championship winning coach in Kirby Smart. And you just, like Alabama for quite some time under Nick Saban, you just expect that this Georgia team is going to roll, even though they didn't win the SEC last year and didn't go to the college football playoff. So, I think that's just become the standard at Georgia. That's what Ohio State wants to establish with this roster this year, is just the innate belief that every year you are one of the best 2-3 teams in the country. And Ohio State these past few years has been one of the best 5, 6, 7 teams in the country, right? So I think it's fair to put Georgia on top of whether you're ranking, the AP poll or the coaches poll at this point, whether you're talking about overall talent of the roster. If Will Howard, or if let's say if Kyle McCord had a better season last year, stays in Columbus and is going to be a 2nd-year starter, I think you feel a little bit better about that when you're comparing those rosters, because, you've got a quarterback coming back instead of a Will Howard, who I think a lot of people think can do some things in this offense and kind of elevate his game with the weapons around him, but isn't the proven commodity at this level, despite having won a Big 12 championship a couple of years ago and been very good with Kansas State. He's not a Carson Beck level guy. If a CJ Stroud were still hanging around Columbus, for instance, I think that makes a big difference at a crucial position. So I agree with you. I think I would probably put Georgia's overall roster at the top of college football right now. The way that they've recruited over the last couple of years, the last several years, has been as good as anyone in the country. But Ohio State's right there. I mean, think about, that game we saw in the Peach Bowl a couple of years ago. A couple things go a different way, and it's Ohio State going on there. And then how does that change the perspective on things? Probably, I would imagine the Buckeyes win the national championship against TCU, given how easily Georgia handled the Bullfrogs. So I think, perception right now is reality until you get into the season, these teams start playing.
You brought up Kelly, you brought up Day. Do you think it's simply a dynamic there where Chip Kelly runs with his offense because he's so well respected? We had a conversation the other day on the USC channel because they're so familiar with Chip Kelly there, of course. And he's considered one of the best minds in the sport on the offensive side. And he runs headfirst into a situation with Ryan Day, one of the best minds on that side of the football. how they will work together. Ryan Day says, I'm CEO, take the offense, or how that dynamic works?
I think it will be interesting to see, not that Chip Kelly needs to like revitalize his career. His career's been very good, but I think because you were at UCLA and you didn't all of a sudden elevate UCLA to this top of the Pac-12 type of program every year, the perception is that Chip Kelly hasn't really done much since maybe his first or second year in the NFL in terms of kind of being this innovative offensive guy. And that's really not the case. I believe UCLA finished 31st or 32nd in total offense last season, which, if you look at the recruiting rankings and kind of the talent composite that we do at 247 on what he had on the offensive side of the ball, it's actually pretty good achievement with this UCLA team. I think now you bring him into Columbus. It's still Ryan Day's offense, but Chip Kelly is going to add some things here and there, especially in the run game, I think. And so I think it's a nice mix, and it's two guys that really know each other well, going back to when Ryan Day was a player for Chip Kelly. Actually, going back even further than that, I wrote about this earlier this offseason. They're from the same hometown. Chip Kelly used to hang out at Ryan Day's grandparents' house when Ryan Day was a kid, so he's known Chip Kelly pretty much all his life. That can be a good thing. That can be a bad thing, depending on how their relationship is. It seems to be very good, but there also seems to be the willingness to, butt heads at times if you think there are certain things that need to get done, and maybe the other guy sees something a little bit different, which I think is important in a coaching world. So I see the blueprint for how this works. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think that you shouldn't discredit Chip Kelly's innovativeness just because people weren't really watching UCLA. When they had athletes, when they had talent on offense, Chip Kelly figured out a way to use them. And I think now you go to Ohio State where you're only going to have more of those. It seems, on paper at least, like a match made in heaven, for lack of a better term.